Hi, welcome back. We're going to be talking about some more security related stuff. The videos are going really well there. And this time I'm going to be letting you know the best tool that you can have for self-protection in the UK. And you might be thinking, pretty sure that you can't have a tool for protection in the UK. Actually, you can. It's called a knowledge of the law. And that is the primary thing most people don't have. And that is the thing that's going to tell you exactly what you can and cannot do. That information is vital in order to be able to protect yourself from criminals, from danger, from violence. So we're going to give a brief overview about that today. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of the legal policy, etc. If you want that kind of information, it is available. I'll chuck a link down below, but beware, it's a lot of information. There's a lot of legalese in it. The reason I feel that I can give out this information in the sort of basic format I'm going to, I was arrested many times through 23 years worth of security work. Each time I was generally charged with some sort of assault, and each time I used self-defense or third-party self-defense or defense of property in order to extract myself from that legal wrangle, and I always walked out with a no further action. That in itself is a bit of a pain, because no further action means the police are kind of annoyed with you and they keep that on file, and every time they deal with you they're like, oh, it's this guy again. But it is not a criminal conviction. In fact, you know, it's nothing at all, and it's only known to the police. What are your basic legal means of defence in the UK? When can you defend yourself? How can you defend yourself? Let's go through that. So you can defend yourself, self-defense. You can defend a third party, so another human being that you fear is in danger, and you can defend property. And you can defend all of those using what they call reasonable force. And there are a couple of caveats to this, but this is where people get confused, because I've heard a lot of people talking about this in forums and on the internet, and they say, oh, in the UK you've got no, right to defend yourself. The criminal can do what they want, and it just means that if you try and defend yourself, you will end up in prison. And that is total nonsense. We all have a right to defend ourselves. It seems odd to me that more people don't know this stuff, because it's something that I set out to learn very carefully before I started getting involved in confrontations, because I wanted to be able to step right up to the line of the law, defend myself in the best legal way possible, defend others in the best legal way possible, but without incarcerating myself. Because again, I see a lot of people online, talking the big hero stuff. A lot of them are keyboard warriors. They probably never got out of their mum's spare room, and they're still sat there eating Doritos. But they will type stuff like, oh, I don't care about the law. If anyone tries to hurt me, I'm going to do this, that and the other. And ultimately, we should all care about the law, because it's no good me saying that I'm going to protect myself and others, and then I leave my family in the lurch by disappearing off to prison for 7 years. How are they going to pay the rent? How are they going to pay the bills? I've got responsibilities. Most of us have got responsibilities. So I want to be doubly sure that I'm keeping my family safe and myself safe, because I don't really want to be spending 7 years in prison. I'm going to be making sure I do that before I need to act, and then I can act in a way that steps me right up to that line if necessary, and I can be sure that I can apply the maximal amount of protection to myself that I possibly can, and to others, and to property for that matter. So if the law allows us to protect ourselves in a reasonable manner, how do we sort of understand what that means? So it means that a jury is going to sit there ultimately and decide what they believe is reasonable. They will be guided by a judge if this ever made it to court. So you have to imagine things in those terms. And they're going to be asked, it isn't what they believe is reasonable. It's what they believe you thought was reasonable at the time. That's an important factor. So the context of the situation matters. The people in the situation matter. Now, I'll give you some examples. If an old lady comes up to me and starts swiping me with an umbrella and prodding me with the pointy end of her umbrella, and she weighs 8 stone and I'm 16 stone, and then I punch her in the face, that is a form of self-defense. But it is totally unreasonable, because I could have taken many other actions in that situation to stop her from attacking me with an umbrella. It's not even reasonable to suggest that I thought my life was in danger because of her physical size, because of the weapon she was using, etc. My life realistically wasn't in danger. So I could have just grabbed the umbrella. I could have just, put my hand out and stopped her from moving forward, and it would have been very easy for me to do so. So any more than that kind of behaviour could be deemed unreasonable in that situation. Now, if you have me as the victim, let's say, and the same weapon, let's say it's an umbrella with a pointy end, and it's a dark night, and 3 other 16 stone guys come round the corner and they point over at me and say, we're going to really kill you, we don't like the way you look, we're going to F you up. And then they come over and they start trying to stab me in the face with this umbrella. That is a totally different scenario. Although it's the same weapon, let's say I'm the same victim, the same situation is occurring, but because one of the characters has changed, now it's a lot more of a threat. So it would be very reasonable for me to use a lot more force in that situation. You have to put yourself in the jury's shoes and imagine them sort of thinking about how you're viewing this situation. Are they believing that you realistically felt that you were in severe danger, that your life was being threatened, for example? Do they realistically think that you had to take those actions and you felt those actions were reasonable at the time? So it would be quite reasonable of me in that situation to get out my own umbrella, for example, if I had one with me, and stab the guy back in his eye, because I've got 3 guys trying to, or saying they're going to kill me. That's a pretty serious situation. I have no idea the reasons for that. I just know that they're actually attempting it with this umbrella. So 2 fictional situations, obviously, but you can see that there's a marked difference between the 2. The important part about that is it hinges on how you feel, whether you think it was reasonable at the time. So different victims will have, different reactions as well. So now if we change the victim around and I'm the 7.5 stone old lady and I'm being attacked by another old lady of a similar weight and size, she would have just as much reason to feel, in fear of her life, because someone of a similar size and weight is attacking her. She hasn't got any particular physical prowess or ability over them. So she then might be able to argue that if she punched back, for example, that would be a reasonable thing to do. You have to think of it in those terms. And we mentioned objects being used, so this is something that comes up a lot. Is it reasonable to use what would be referred to as a weapon? That there lies the problem. It is not legal to carry a weapon in the UK, and a weapon can be anything. It's to do with the intent. So it could be a pencil. If you're carrying a pencil around and you told the police, my intent was to carry this pencil around to use it as a weapon on someone, then that is therefore a weapon and you're going to get into trouble. And if you said that after a fight, if you got attacked and you said, I always carry a pencil in my pocket as a weapon to use in case I get attacked, and then they attack me, so I stab them repeatedly with my pencil, you're going to get into some trouble. But you can use things that come to hand, and I've mentioned this before. So if you have a pencil because you like to write in your notebook and you got attacked and you pulled that pencil out because you were in fear of your life, and then you lashed out with it and used it to get someone off of you, that would probably be considered reasonable in a court of law. And again, it all depends on the context. It wouldn't be considered reasonable, if someone sort of slapped you around the face and you were in a fairly safe environment and they were of a pretty small physical size. You couldn't stab them with a pencil. But walking down the road on a dark night in a strange area and some big guy comes around the corner and starts attacking you, that would be reasonable. So you see where I'm going with this. I think this is where the misunderstanding occurs, because it's a fluid situation. There are no hard and fast rules. There's no rule that says if you get attacked, you can utilize this method to subdue the attacker. You know, you're allowed to punch him in the face, but you can't kick him afterwards or something like that. You know, it's a very nuanced situation that takes a little bit of common sense, and you have to kind of apply yourself to thinking about it a little. It's actually useful to run through some scenarios in your head and imagine, you know, put yourself in the jury's shoes and imagine hearing those scenarios and thinking, could I believe that that's a reasonable thing to do? You know, if I was attacked in the middle of the night and I reacted this way, or someone else reacted this way, would I believe that was reasonable? And I've heard some people say, you know, you can knock someone over who's attacking you, but you can't, you know, do anything else to them. That's not reasonable. Again, not true. It's a nuanced situation. So if I was being attacked by a large aggressive guy and he was trying to beat me up or kill me, and I was really afraid of that situation, then I could knock him down and I could keep administering whatever force I felt like until I was happy that that threat was, you know, over. And I'm not going to let that person keep getting up and swinging at me again, because every time I do that, I'm increasing my risk of death or injury. So I'm not going to let that happen. You know, you can very clearly see if someone is out of the fight or if they're just going to get back up and start again. And that's happened to me multiple times. You know, I've been attacked by people. I've been attacked by people with knives. I've been attacked by people with blunt instruments. I've been attacked with just fists and feet and whatever. And in all those situations, I ensured that the person attacking me was no longer a threat in one way or another. So it doesn't prevent you from carrying out more force when you've already hit that person and say they've fallen over. But where you would trip up is in a sort of revenge situation. So if someone comes and punches me in the face and I punch them back and knock them out, they're out of the fight. Or they start running off, for example. Another thing, I might hit them back, they start running away. Now, what if I then chase them, trip them over and start stamping on them? That has gone over and above what self-defense could be. You know, I no longer was in fear of my life, the person was running away. Or I was no longer in fear of my life because that person had fallen over and they were unconscious. Now I'm administering rough justice to them, and that isn't my job to do that. You know, that's the court's job to administer the justice. So that's never gonna weigh in your favour. If you've kind of got a load of digs in after the fact when you didn't actually need to, then that's not going to go well for you. But perfectly acceptable to keep hitting someone if they are still a threat to you, or even if you believe they are still a threat to you. That's the important part. If you believe that your life is in danger, then you can still administer force that appears to be reasonable to prevent that from happening. And as long as the jury believes that's realistic and reasonable, that will be no problem. And don't forget, most of this never goes to a jury. None of my assaults in the security world ended up in a court in front of a jury, not one, and there were many. They all ended up probably either being shut down by the police because they knew it just wasn't worth it, because I'd obviously told them about my self-defense situation, or they'd maybe been kicked up to the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, and they had made a decision based on the evidence and the stuff they had seen that this wasn't in the public interest to prosecute. And generally speaking, if you've got a sensible and robust self-defense and you let the police know that in your statement when you're interviewed, the CPS would view that along with any other evidence that's been gathered, and they would make a decision in your favour, because they know that it's not worth wasting public money taking you to court just to have your self-defense read out and then everything is over basically for the other side. You know, if you utilise self-defense, it's not an excuse, right? So if you enact self-defense, if you're charged with an assault, it's now up to the prosecution to prove otherwise. You know, it's up to the prosecution to prove that that was not self-defense. Now, I've heard some people say, well, you must wait to be attacked. You know, self-defense is obviously that you get attacked and then you begin to defend yourself. Again, incorrect. you can make what's called a preemptive strike, because the important part is that you believed that you were in serious danger and that you had to do something, take some sort of action, administer some force in order for that not to happen. And in fact, this did happen to me. You know, one of the kind of funnier ones that I've spoken about before, and I'll mention quickly again here. I had a guy standing in front of me for about 20 minutes saying he was going to kill me just because I was doing security and standing on the door, and he was very angry for whatever reason. He had tried to get in the club, and he was going into his jacket for what he said was a knife. So I was kind of keeping him at a fair distance, but he kept lunging towards me in a kind of a way that a boxer may feign a punch, you know. So it was like trying to get me to flinch kind of thing. Eventually he came too close and I struck him, and he hadn't hit me, hadn't done anything to me, but I struck him because he had said he had a knife. He was acting as if he had a knife, and I had every reason to believe that may be true. I feared that he was trying to stab me, so I made a decision to strike him, and I struck him once. He fell on the floor. So that was that. I then got arrested about a week or so later, and the police played me just like a 1-minute clip of that situation. The clip they played was basically me stepping forward, hitting this guy. The guy falls on the floor unconscious, and then the police says, right, you know, you're in big trouble. You've assaulted someone whilst you're working on the door. My answer to that was, rewind the video, let's watch the first 20 minutes. And I could see straight away the policeman's face kind of dropped, because he really didn't want me to watch that, because his aim there is to get me to incriminate myself. What he wants me to say is watch that tiny snippet of video, and then I turn around and say, yeah, the guy was an arsehole. I hated him. He deserved it. I gave him a dig because he was, you know, annoying me, and I just got fed up with him. Because that wouldn't be self-defense, right? That would be me striking someone just because I didn't like them. So we rewind the video and we watch, and I say, look, you know, you can see me putting my hands up. I'm clearly on the video trying to calm this guy down for quite a substantial period of time. You can see the guy with his teeth gritted, obviously saying some angry words and kind of going into his coat as if he's got a knife in there. And I'm telling the policeman this as the video's playing, and he's looking more and more upset about it. And this is one thing to remember, you know, the police often aren't there to establish who's right and who's wrong, and they're not going to give you a pat on the back if you were in the right. They're there to arrest someone and bump their figures up a lot of the time. So this guy just wanted to arrest me. He didn't care that that guy was a little violent psychopath with a knife. All he cared about was that I'd clumped this guy, and he had it on video, and to him, hey, I've spent some time on this, I can get an arrest out of it, and that'll be a good mark in my book. That's where I get a little bit upset about these public services, because as a taxpayer, we all believe we're paying into those services to protect us, and to kind of, they're the good guys, they're going to look after the good guys, and they're going to sort of go after the baddies. But I had a lot of experiences where it was just sort of box ticking, like bureaucratic policing, where basically we've turned up, we've seen something, we've got a little bit of evidence pointing that that might be true, so therefore we're going to go all guns blazing for that, and we're not even going to bother to kind of establish who was good, bad, right, wrong, etc. So that just demonstrates, you know, I walked away from that one with an NFA and no further action. And that demonstrates that you can make a preemptive strike as a self-defense. You know, that's perfectly acceptable. And I should also note that every single time I was brought in and questioned about these incidents, I would get my solicitor to come to the station and I would make a prepared statement. The good part about making a prepared statement is you can refer back to it. So instead of giving a completely no comment interview, so you don't want to say too much in an interview because you can end up accidentally saying the wrong thing or getting the wrong time, tripping yourself up, that can be used against you. And it can be completely innocent, just because you're tired or anxious or whatever it is, under stress, you get something slightly wrong and they can use that against you in court. If you make a prepared statement, you can just say no comment if you wish and refer them back to the prepared statement, and that means you haven't given a completely no comment interview. If you give a completely no comment interview, the judge is actually allowed to draw inference from that, and he can sort of guide the jury in court and say, look, bear in mind, when this guy gives his evidence in court, he declined to give evidence at the time, so take that with a pinch of salt. You know, that's the sort of inference, meaning that the jury will be guided to take your words not as solidly as if you had given them in the first place. Might seem a little unfair. That's the way the English justice system works, unfortunately. But if you make a prepared statement, you avoid that situation happening, and it's something you can then refer back to later. So if you are spoken to in court or you're re-interviewed later on, you can take your prepared statement with you. You can refer to that. You can have it with you in an interview if you wish, and when they ask you a question, you can say, yes, that happened at 9:17. I refer to my prepared statement. So it's a very useful document. One of the other misconceptions about the law is that you can only protect yourself. Actually not true. As I've mentioned, you have third-party self-defense where you can protect others. So if you see someone else and you have a reasonable fear that they're in danger of severe harm or death, you can step in and administer force to the person that's attacking them in order to stop that happening. In exactly the same manner, it takes into account all those same circumstances, the nuance of the situation, the reasonable factor, it's all taken into account. You can also do the similar thing with property that most people don't know about, or they don't think that they can do that. You can actually defend your property. Now, this is where things get a bit tricky, because you might find that someone, for example, is damaging your car outside. Now you're going to go outside to confront the people that are damaging your car. You're going to try and protect property. So you then get into a physical interaction with them. Now there will probably be an argument from the prosecution side. Well, if you'd have stayed in, the interaction wouldn't have happened. You didn't need to sort of act with force. You should have rang the police, etc., etc. So it can get a bit more bogged down when you're defending property, but the law does allow for that, so we have to understand what the law allows and doesn't allow. Personally, I would maybe defend property because I don't like people messing with my property, but that's also based on the fact that, I've got that experience and I spent 23 odd years dealing with those sort of people. I wouldn't suggest that's a great idea, because you're actually massively increasing your chances of being seriously physically hurt, and you've got insurance. You can replace property. If someone's vandalising your car, you can just get insurance, and yeah, it's going to cost you some money, but costing you some money is a lot better than ending up in hospital with a critical injury or dead, and going to the morgue. So I'm definitely not suggesting that people just randomly defend property with force. Now, some people may ask, can you ever use unreasonable force? And the answer to that is yes. There is actually a part of the law that allows you to be less than reasonable, and that is often referred to as the householder section of self-defense, or the homeowner section of self-defense. And this came into force in around 2013, so stuff that happened before that law came in, it wouldn't apply to. But after that date, I think it's April 2013, there is a lot more leeway in terms of what is reasonable. So if you're a homeowner, householder, and someone is trying to break into your house and they're coming over your threshold, and you have a belief that they're trying to do you or your family harm, or they're trying to get into your house, then the law basically says that it's very difficult for you to make the correct judgment as to what exactly is reasonable or not. And that's very true. Imagine the stress. You might have just been woken up in bed, you hear something bashing on the door downstairs, you go down, suddenly you're confronted by some shadowy figure getting in. It's incredibly difficult in that situation for anyone to be able to make a very good decision on what would be a reasonable thing to do, because you cannot, in that small amount of time, make out what's the person's intention. Have they got a weapon? What are they doing? Obviously their intention isn't good because they're breaking into your house, so you do know that much. So it would be reasonable in those circumstances, that a lot of times people would grab something that came to hand and repeatedly hit the person with it. So it might be a really heavy ornament, or it could be like a ceremonial sword, or whatever you happen to have hanging around at hand, a walking stick, something, and you would just kind of lose control because it's in the moment. And the law actually allows for that. They allow for a disproportionate amount of force to be administered. What they do not allow for is what they refer to as being a gross amount of force, which then we're again stepping into the realms of, if you've beaten the guy half to death with a walking stick and then you drag him into the kitchen and stab him repeatedly, that has gone way beyond self-defense. It's gone way beyond what is reasonable. And you might ask, well, couldn't you just run backwards into one of the rooms and shut a door, for example, and lock yourself in the room? Would that then negate your ability to self-defense? In fact, that's also written into law, that you do not have to retreat. It may be brought up by the prosecution. If it got to court, they would say, well, you had a perfectly reasonable opportunity to turn around and run, or to lock yourself in a room, or whatever it is, whether that's outside in the street or in your house. There is no requirement in law within self-defense for you to retreat, even if you can. It's a sensible option. I definitely suggest if you can retreat. If I was being attacked by a hugely obese person and I happen to be a marathon runner, my ideal situation there would be to run away. That's a winning situation, right? But that's not always possible. I'm not the best runner in the world, so if I got attacked by 3 wiry youths with weapons, me running away is only going to make my situation worse, because they're going to chase me down and now they're going to fight me and I'm absolutely worn out, and they're probably pretty young, fit and healthy, so they'll be okay. So that would be the beginning of the end for me. I need to be able to stand my ground in those sort of situations, and that's exactly why that part of the law exists. When you read into this, the law is pretty damn sensible. When it's been written out, you can see exactly why they've come to these conclusions in law. It does give everyone a fair chance of defence. My main issue is that it denies the rights of people to carry any kind of weapon specifically for self-defence. That's unfortunate, because I do believe, for example, women should be able to carry like a pepper spray. That would be a great thing for them to be able to carry, because it's non-lethal, less lethal. It's not going to do anyone any serious damage. And to be fair, if a guy's trying to attack a woman, I don't really care if it does do him some damage. But the worst that's going to happen, he's going to get very painful eyes. He's going to get, trouble sort of coughing and spluttering, and he's going to run off. So an absolutely ideal thing, but for some reason the government have deemed that is not appropriate for women to be able to use in the UK. One of the things I've often heard bandied about when it comes to self-defense is people say, I'm not allowed to use self-defense because I've done karate lessons and I'm a trained karate person, a trained martial artist or whatever, and that would be viewed dimly, that the court would somehow decide that therefore I wasn't allowed to use that. I've even had guys tell me that they've had their hands and feet registered as offensive weapons and all this kind of stuff. There's no facility in the UK, in any of the UK, to register your hands and feet as any sort of weapon. That's a completely ridiculous thing. If anyone says that to you, know that you're talking to an absolute buffoon. He probably spends most of his time at his mum's spare room or down the pub talking utter nonsense to a bunch of other idiots. But if you've got training, martial arts, boxing, whatever background, that could be examined in court. So, for example, if I was, attacked and I overzealously sort of beat someone up and really went to work on them, they would then be asking the question, well, you're a pretty big guy, you maybe have got all this security experience, you seem to have some, experience in the boxing ring or whatever, was it really necessary to hit that guy 28 times? It would come into effect like that, but it certainly doesn't preclude you from using it. I've had that situation occur. In fact, the time I mentioned where I'd had to hit that guy who was threatening to stab me, the policeman said, you stepped forward and then you swung a punch as if you were a boxer. And I said, well, I was doing boxing at the time, I was training in boxing. And he said, well, that's out of order. If you're training in boxing, you shouldn't be hitting people. And I said, well, ideally I wouldn't hit people, but the guy is threatening to kill me, so it doesn't leave me with much choice. He said, well, you step forward, that's section 18, which would mean that I had intent. Well, I said, well, I did have intent. I intended to hit him. So absolutely, that was my intent. But that section 18 would be that I was assaulting him. I was using self-defense. So my intent was self-defense, and I successfully administered force that was reasonable in self-defense. So you see how that works. You know, he's trying to lead me down one route, i.e. I've assaulted a guy, and that was my intention to start with. You must be very careful to stick to the option that you know to be true, which is that you were in fear of your life and you were trying to defend yourself. Now, I strongly recommend you do further reading on this subject. You know, I've basically presented this video as a kind of entertainment video to get your interest in the subject and to get you to understand how important it is, because once you understand this thoroughly, you are able to properly protect yourself. You will not be questioning what you're doing. You know, if someone attacks you, you need to be able to react to that. If you can't get away and you must react to it, you need to be able to do that without thinking other things like, oh my God, should I hit them back because I could get in trouble, or maybe I won't. And you don't have time to think like that. You must know what you can and can't do before these situations occur. That will buy you valuable time. You know, it will also let you know when it's right to walk away, because there will be situations like I've mentioned in other videos where I had guys coming up and they were a bit drunk and they're a bit full of ego and they're mouthing off to me. I knew that they weren't a serious threat to me. That isn't a self-defense situation. I can't preemptively strike that guy just because he's called me a couple of rude names. You know, that's not enough. That would be me assaulting a guy because I was peed off with him. If the guy is clearly demonstrating that he's trying to attack me, you know, this is where CCTV comes in really handy. I don't always like CCTV. I think it's kind of, we're a bit overdone with CCTV in this country, but on the benefit, if you're a decent person and you're having problems in the street and someone's trying to attack you, then at least you can rely on that afterwards and say, look, you know, you can see his body language, you can see the way he's moving towards me, he's clearly trying to strike me. And you have to make a difference between that and someone who's just being rude or intimidating. There's a big difference between the two. There's probably 98% of the situations I've been involved in are guys just being dicks and trying to be intimidating, and there's only a couple of percent where things actually had me seriously concerned for my safety. So in the description, I'll leave a link that'll give you links through to legitimate sites where you can do further reading. Get yourself a decent solicitor if you need to. You know, when the situation occurs, I would actually suggest looking around and getting a decent criminal solicitor. That's important, because believe me, not all solicitors get stuff right. Some are not criminal solicitors. They might be a friend of the family. They give you free advice. But if they're not criminal solicitors, don't take their free advice, because they might be used to talking to people about bloody housing developments or health matters or any other thing that solicitors get used for, and they have only half a clue about what they're talking about. So get a criminal solicitor who specialises in that kind of thing, and just get his card. You know, get a suggestion of someone that knows he's good. Get his card and his number and stick it in your wallet. Hopefully you'll never need it, but it's very, very useful when you do need it to have that on the back burner, so that when you get to a police cell, you're not asking, oh, can I have the duty solicitor? Because believe me, they will send you some absolute brain dead numpty that's pretty peed off that he even has to be there. You might get lucky, but generally speaking you won't. A lot of the times those guys are more of a hindrance than a help. You know, they actually just want to get their fee for turning up and get the hell out of there as quickly as possible. That's their MO. You know, they're on pretty low wages for a solicitor. They're kind of at the bottom of the pile. They're not going to want to spend too much time on you. A few do. I'm not saying they're all like that, but a lot that I've dealt with in the past have not been good. So get a decent one, and then even if it means you waiting there till the next morning, I would rather wait for a decent solicitor to turn up than kind of make do with a duty. I hope that's been of some use. I hope that's kind of opened some people's eyes to what maybe you can and can't do in this country regarding protecting yourself, others, and even property. The only thing I'm unsure of, and I would love to hear from anyone watching that really knows the answer to this, I've always believed that you couldn't protect animals, and I've always worried about that. Someone once tried to kidnap my dog, my beautiful little French bulldog. I had 3 guys, some travellers turn up and basically try and grab my dog. It didn't work out too well for them, but I was concerned. That was one of the only times I've been concerned, because I can't rely on third-party self-defense because he's not a human. He is my most precious possession. I wouldn't really call him a possession, but he's my most precious thing. You know, I don't want anyone to hurt my dog. So would the law clarify that as me protecting property because I've purchased that dog? That was kind of what I hoped. I'm not entirely sure how that would go, but nevertheless, I would protect my dog at all costs anyway, no matter what the law said. There's no way I'm going to let a bunch of nutters just disappear my dog. But yeah, interesting sort of caveat to that is, what do you do about pets? Anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Catch you all next time.